Hi, I'm Susanna. Welcome back to Fatal Dates, my show about finding real sex and love in an unreal world. My date today is author and sex worker Lotte Latham. I'm really excited to meet Lotte. I've read her book and it's an absolutely hilarious and candid look at what it is to be a submissive sex worker. I dabble in fatal strategies by hosting this podcast, but Lotte, it seems to me, is living it out in her personal and professional life. I want to know what it's like to be a very powerful object in a world that so valorizes being a subject. And I'm sure there's lots of other things that we're going to discuss. For my date today, slightly dressed down. It's quite cold today in London. I've got some sensible trousers on, got some semi-sensible shoes on. Interested to know what Lotte's going to be wearing for our date. Let's see how it goes. Hello, Lotte. Hi there. How are you doing? Welcome to Fatal Dates. How are you feeling about coming on this date with me?
I am very excited, but also I think you're going to reach into a lot of areas of the book that are very personal to me. So I'm kind of excited to see where you probe, as it were.
I'm very excited to talk about your great book, Dear Mr. Andrews, which I've really enjoyed, which is a memoir of transitioning time from being a sugar baby, if that's the right term for it, for being a fully fledged escort. So Lotte, tell me about sex work. Tell me about different sorts of sex work.
Personally, I've worked in the kind of sugar baby realm, but also been a full service escort, both with agencies and independent. But I have always come to this as it's been something I've done alongside a day job. It's very much been something I've done by choice. I am a full service escort, part-time. And that very much suits me.
What does it mean to be a full service escort? Tell me.
Oh, full service. I mean, it's a way that the word prostitute or whatever has fallen out of favor because it's quite derogatory. People say full service sex work now when they mean an escort that has sex with their clients as opposed to just maybe escorting them to an event, which I hear say is a thing, but I've never found to be the case.
There's all sorts of different sorts of sex work. There's good ways to do sex work and there's bad ways to do sex work. What would be some of the good ways of doing it and some of the bad ways of doing it?
I mean, sex trafficking is illegal and a totally different issue. If you're forcing someone to have sex for money, it is deeply immoral and illegal and it should not be happening. But then consensual sex work, online sex work, people that do camming, there's people that sell their panties online, there's people that do phone sex, there's people that do porn, there's people that do full service, escorting, there's people that work in brothels, massage parlors with happy endings. I guess there's this term that's used to describe it called the hierarchy, and it's that, I mean, it's a real cold face of capitalism in terms of the variety of money that you can get for the same type of labor. And as an educated woman that has a career outside of this, I can afford to charge a rate that means I don't have to do it very much, or that I don't hinge on it, or I can choose the clients I want. Whereas the average money for being a prostitute in the UK is £70 per encounter, and most people are working, I can't remember, is it 25 appointments a week? I mean, I've never done that. It's always been into the hundreds, and I maybe worked 3 or 4 times in 1 week. But based on nothing really, there's no difference in the labour that's happening, and so it's a very fraught subject in that sense.
Why are you able to charge a higher rate than somebody who charges £70 an hour?
I mean, I guess it turns into this object territory of indifference again. I don't necessarily need it or rely on it. And also I'm white, middle class. Everyone that I answer the advert for always says they don't want to me to be full-time as a sex worker. So they obviously seem to privilege people that aren't full-time sex workers for whatever reason. And I think that says more about them than it does about me. Yeah, I'm a posh blonde with boobs. I don't know. Like, although I used to work as a plus size escort when I was living in Berlin, and I was on 2 different agencies. The regular one, because I wasn't that fat, I was in their mid-size, so they put me on the fat girl escort agency and on the what's it called, their main agency. And if I got booked by the main agency, I got £100 more an hour, 100 more euros, sorry, an hour than I did on their specialist BBW XXL escort. So I mean, so there's this hierarchy that's so unspoken, but it says a lot about society because it's reflecting their wars. It's a mirror that's reflecting society right back at itself.
Fascinating. And in your experience, is it better to work for an agency or is it better to work independently?
Well, the agencies tend to take 30% and you don't know how or why they're vetting their clients. But then it does take the legwork out if you don't like bureaucracy. And I found my way into it through agencies because I was working in Germany and I couldn't speak German so well at the time, and I can't again now, but my German improved through working at an escort agency. I think that there's like a lot of power in self-objectification and kind of owning it, but also it's the type of object that you want to be, because I've got kind of fixated on this idea of enjoying being a worthless object or enjoying the degradation of being somehow worthless in some way as being like a resistance against having to make yourself like a high value object. I don't walk through it feeling like like a beautiful woman or a powerful object. I actually find my power in sort of submitting to circumstances I feel that I don't necessarily that I can't change unless I learn how to enjoy them.
Can I ask you, to what degree do you feel that this is a political choice of yours, and to what extent do you relate all this on a societal level?
I would say it's about 70% of the motivation. There's a lot of very politically active young women and men who are sex workers because they think it's the best option in the society that we live in, and are using it as a way they can devote more time to their causes. Through writing the book, I got involved in some activism, and I mean, these are all sex workers with PhDs. They're sex workers that are well immersed in many industries. They're accountants, they're philosophers, they're scientists, and like they're also sex workers, and it's one aspect of what they do. And I think it's pleasure and objectification is inherently political. It's political from the point of view that you're creating a commodity out of your body, which is kind of the most purest form that capital can take in some ways. And it's acknowledging that you're a body for hire in most jobs that you work in as a labourer, and that seeing yourself as for sale is pretty much what a universal experience of what people go through, well, most people go through on the daily. And this is just a way of taking more control of it in a more direct fashion. And further to that, it's political to me because I get to talk to a lot of people that have political views through my sex work that I do not have at all. Like, you know, if I look at my Instagram feed and if I go to activist groups, by and large, people have the same opinions as me. It's like a little bubble, you know. We all think, you know, borders are terrible. We all think all of these kind of things. And then you have a date with somebody who actually is in control of a lot of things and has the microphone most of the time. You know, like doctors, lawyers, politicians, and they say some of the most terrible things that you haven't ever heard anyone say before. And they say it out loud because they're relaxed, they've had a drink, you know, they're there for sex. And sometimes they expose these opinions that are really quite fascinating. And like that insight is, I feel like it's I'm not privileged to get that insight, but I mean, it's a reminder that there's still something to fight against, as it were.
When people's guard is down, they will say what is not normally said in society. So I'm curious, what sort of things have people said to you that have shocked you or surprised you?
I mean, maybe it's like quoting Churchill during sex, or maybe it's things like, giving their views on immigration, or how, unemployed people just don't want jobs, and everything wrong with Britain is the welfare system. That was definitely something I've heard several times on a date. There's this whole adage, fuck the patriarchy, but not for free. And I don't think that. I actually don't like making this sort of gender divide and thinking of the patriarchy as an enemy, but like, with my book, for instance, before it became a book, it was letters that were written to a sugar daddy. I know it's such cringy parlance. It takes a while to get to say sugar daddy out loud without it making you cringe. I was writing to him. He's a perfectly educated, wonderful, insightful, creative human being, but I was writing to him every day for 4 years, telling him I was writing a book about him and telling him I was writing. And then the moment that I showed him the book, he absolutely freaked out and was like, but you weren't actually going to do that. And it just highlights that they didn't actually listen to anything I was saying. Like, if you're not getting mansplained, then you're just being somewhat like, it's going over their head. And I just think that that's really funny.
So I'm curious, you hear these comments, do you do political education as part of the service that you're providing?
It takes a few dates for me to want to participate or play tennis in that way, and they have to be a bit specific sort of person, but most of the time they don't want that.
I want to ask you some rude and personal questions, and you're obviously at any point allowed to tell me to fuck off. So I want to know, to what degree is it a turn on to have sex with people whose political views are so very different from your own?
I find it one of the primary motives, and it's a really hard thing to explain to people because political masochism is a thing. But like the best examples of it are when it's the other way around, I guess, when there's a video that it was circulating for a long time. I can't remember the name of the person who made it. She is a dominatrix and she is Israeli, and she likes to take her clients to the ballot box and force them to vote for against the party that they want to. And it's very funny, and they're like crawling on the floor wearing these dog collars, and she's whipping them and telling them to vote for this left-wing party in Israel, and it's funny. But then the other way around, like sometimes I read Dominic Cummings' Substack when I want to find a little bit of erotica in my life. It's hard to contend with, but it's to me, it's about internalization of something. And I mean, a lot on this show, people talk about porn, and with you, and I feel like they're talking about pornography from a very penetrative place, a very heterosexual place, and perversion doesn't seem to get mentioned very much, but like this kind of humiliation and degradation is something that I really get off on. I don't think this is an evolutionary issue either. I think it's a socially conditioned one. And I was thinking about the amount of times people bring up evolutionary things on this show as well, like this, this evolutionary drive to be a certain way. I think it tends to be men that bring up evolutionary things because somehow I think they feel more justified by their bodies than women do, who don't talk about their evolutionary, like, teleological function as much, because actually it kind of would fuck us over.
Perhaps you saw a date I had with, let's call it, as he called it, a dating coach. He was saying a lot of interesting things to me about what women really like, what women really are. And there was a point where I said to him, for me, sex is a theatre of everything. It's a place where all the stuff that happens outside can be turned into play and theatre, a private realm, which is, again, this is dodgy to say, but is an extension perhaps of the games we used to play as children that we're not allowed to play anymore as adults, where you could just act out and all things are possible if you found a proper partner who's prepared to do that in spirit with you. But what is fun in a romantic and in a sexual partner is someone who isn't exactly the same as you, who you could perhaps extend yourself by getting to know and to play with. And I like very much the idea that it's all just conditioning. It's all just play. It's what society does to us. It's what our parents have done to us. It's what we've done to us ourselves. And here's this arena where in a safe space, we could, if we find the right person, just play out all that stuff and for it not to matter. A kind of expiation, basically, is what it seems like to me.
For me, I don't know whether I could separate between the theatre of sex, as it were, and this idea of sex as power. Are you not also experiencing that in the workplace, in your friendship groups? I think that's a very tidy and healthy way of dealing with it, but to me, it's never stayed that tidy. I know it's an arena where you can internalize these things, but actually sometimes they don't stay in the box. And sometimes it's not like things like consensual, non-consent, say.
What Baudrillard says is, forget about being a subject. Firstly, he says it's an impossible dream. And if you look at people who consider themselves subjects, who are often wealthy men or men with power in our society, they reach a limit where they know there's no such thing as being a subject. The true power lies in being the object, being the thing on the shelf that the shopper, the subject, wishes to purchase or have control over. Because the object, in Baudrillard's terms, free of desire, just can kind of lay back and say, yes, maybe this, maybe that, maybe I'll let you have me, maybe I won't, maybe next Tuesday. Oh, and when you have, so what? Who cares?
I think that shift is probably the most interesting about the arena of play. I think the only time that I actually take umbrage with any of that language is when you bring it into things like the pickup culture, because it does hinge so heavily on this idea of, like, very typical idea of gendered, there's a woman, the longer she doesn't have sex with me, the longer I'll be interested. I don't want her to be this kind of, there's an idea of what that object will be, but these are all like socially conditioned like templates that have gone on top of the object. And yeah, Baudrillard has definitely taken it into a space that is so much more playful and so much more playful with society as well. It's not even like, I think it resonates with me because, like, I don't see my submission or my objectification of self as being to do with the people that I'm having sex with. I see it as on a societal level, or it's like a reaction to the noise and the obscenity, and that makes so much sense. But when it's related to specific examples about things like pornography and pickup artists and what people are looking for in a relationship on a gendered dating app, I worry how that's going to translate, because it becomes about consent culture, and it becomes consent culture is very based on language, and I don't know even how I feel about things being so linguistic, to be honest.
If you know that you have to make it like a satchel in the sky, in the red bed, on the red bed, it'll be true to have a clock we'll get. In an Italian restaurant, in the red bed, on the red bed, it would be true to have a clock we'll get. In the red bed to get...
I found myself in this situation where, because of keywords and because of like SEO and stuff, I'd be trending on an Amazon erotica list at the same time as signing a sexual assault waiver with the media, because I'm talking about stuff that is not necessarily consensual.
Do you feel that you have done something to capitalistic society when you have sex in this way? Do you cast off capitalism when you have paid sex with strangers?
No, it just makes me feel better about it. But I am interested to see whether, I was, flirting with this guy for a while, and then he said a phrase that's really stuck in my head. It's like, well, so what would what would sex work look like after the fall of capitalism and after the revolution or whatever. And I was like, actually, that's a really interesting question. Would it exist? Say I like having sex for money. Would I like that if I didn't live in the world that we live in? Could it exist? Could it ever be something that's beneficial? And I want to go study that subject. I want to know more. There's a lot about Marxism that actually doesn't sit very well with sex work in a lot of ways. Like there's this woman called Alexandra Kollontai who actually sees it more as labor dissenting than participating in the world in that way. And yeah, I'm really fascinated by this subject, and I don't have an answer for you because I no, it doesn't work, but we still live in this world. It's giving me my blood back a little bit, like, you know, but it's not totally an answer for anything. And it does kind of like wear you down because of the repetition of it and like the similarity in people's desires. What starts off as thrilling can end up feeling quite trite when you realize how ubiquitous it is.
You are commodifying a personal space between that historically is done between you and somebody that you have a spark with. And furthermore, people are putting their bodies into your body. And so doesn't that take it beyond an analogy that says it's just the same as going into an office every day? It is more of a transgression. It's not exactly the same.
Because of the bodily bit, the physical penetration changes it.
Yes. Yes.
I think it can be more pervasive because of that. But like, there's been times like, I mean, it's in the book, I was a window dresser. Like sometimes I'd be trying to like burn a piece of wood at like, you know, on a night shift to get the right amount of char on it, and I'd be burning my hand off, and I'd be like, why am I doing this? For some kind of brand, because the brand really wants to look rustic, and I'm like, but you really need to burn your hand right now. And I would, and I come home and I have blisters all down my arms. Or like the last big job that I took on in my day job, I broke out in hives, and I was like, I mean, to me that is more penetrative. But then I work in a kind of gig economy space.
Again, I reveal myself here as a newbie, as a fool. But for me, I think that I would get emotionally involved with people. I think it's not the same thing as having a piece of wood and charring it. I feel that for me, there would be a danger that I would imagine that it was about a connection. The feeling I have is I would begin to spin a story to myself about the people I was seeing, especially if they were regulars of mine. And that might be very difficult for me to do.
So I have a kind of double answer to this question. Like one of them is to do with like how I think the lack of connection that I feel in some of the sex work I have makes it feel more like wanking to me. Like it's masturbatory because like I get into a frenzied space, often an unrequited frenzied space where I can fantasize about it all day, but it's not about connection I'm fantasizing about. It's about abandon. And that isn't about another person. It's kind of just giving into maybe jouissance, you know, like this absolute frenzy of feeling, but like that isn't connection. It's not stories. It's a release, and it's a release that needs to happen with people that I can't hurt because I don't want to have that with someone I have a connection with. The second answer I would give is I remember feeling very ambivalent about the term sex work is work at the beginning, because I was a bit like, well, it's just not the same, is it? You know, like this is like, it's something that's in your body. And like, if you were to make sex work, then you'd have to say that you know, it would need to be that like the sales of goods act would need to be applicable. Like what would you say? Like this woman promised me sex, then she didn't come through, so I take her to a small claims court. Like, you're literally talking about commodifying something that is so personal. And like in the sort of 70s, right, they were saying that it's like porn is just paid paid rape and that sex work is paid consent, and it just isn't, because you can withdraw that consent at any point, even when there is a transaction. And I was like, this is too problematic a space to make sex work under a kind of labor law. Like, how can you have a union for something that is so complex and nuanced as because you'll be talking about rape and consent every day of the week, and that's too complex a space. But now I realise that sex work is just about making it safer for the people who are indulging in it. Yet I find myself in the position that I, as a freelancer who takes payments by invoice, who takes cash payments for some of my sex work encounters and bank transfers to the other one, I do my tax return every year and I'm declaring all of it. And yeah, I guess I'm lucky. I get to put it under my creative business. But like when you have to look at it as sex work, it's really hard. If someone's making their income that way, then you have to rationalize it for a second and turn it into a business in your mind, because you can't pay tax on it if you don't do that. I think that a lot of modern dating culture suffers the same kind of symptoms, like people that are on Tinder and dating a lot of people and making attachments and then they're not going anywhere. I think that that's kind of a symptom of dating lots of people or having sex with lots of people, and how you react to that is a very personal thing.
Well, it's true. But what I also think is especially with this Tinder culture, it's also a culture of hyperreality. And the hyperreality is not just about looking at lots of pretty bodies. The hyperreality is also about having a fantasy. And I think often you can meet a stranger from the internet, you go on a wonderful date with that stranger. Immediately, you begin to have a hyperreal fantasy about how all that's going to pan out. And then you get ghosted. Of course you do, because you're both in a kind of cosplay of a movie date that you've been on. And it has to be said that the place that clients find you and you find clients is not that dissimilar to a dating app. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I always found the parallels between the two things very interesting, because it seemed to me, when I looked at my friends who were using dating apps, that actually there was a lot more respect on sex work apps, because people had parameters or a framework to play with, and it seemed a bit more accountable because they were kind of maybe worried about how loaded the situation was. I had a regular dating app last. I was on it for 2 months, and I became absolutely addicted to the validation. Like, really, within 2 seconds, I was like on it all the time. And I felt this kind of fallout from using it, where I'd be talking to people or one person all evening, and then I found that I had, drunk a bottle of wine or something by myself at the end of the evening, and I'd be looking at it and being like, wow, I've spent this evening by myself talking to someone that doesn't exist, who I'm never going to speak to again. And I don't feel that about sex work, because it's really bookended. And maybe that framework helps mitigate that. But I don't consider it a place for connection, because I don't want my connections to be transactional. But potentially I'm in denial. I don't know.
Well, who knows? I was fascinated to hear you say that, in fact, although we began this conversation by saying you find satisfaction by presenting yourself as, I called, a very beautiful object, and you said, no, a very degraded object, but we could say, meet in the halfway and say, a very beautiful, degraded object living out the effects of capitalism in a play and acting arena that also pays no rent. However, you also said that in the end, you end up sometimes objectifying your clients. And I want to ask you lots of things about that. The first thing I want to ask you is that overt, or is that your secret objectification of your clients?
My book maybe is an example of this. Like, Miss Andrews became kind of an object to me, in the sense that I was telling him all of, like, having all these creative fantasies and telling him everything and like really kind of musifying this person. And I think that seemingly he enjoyed it because of the relevance and because of the power that then bestowed him with to show interest or not show interest. But in terms of whether in regular sex work encounters, I am absolutely certain that the people I go on dates with don't know that I'm objectifying them in order to objectify me. I don't think that there's that kind of deep reaching inquiry. Like I said, I don't think they listen to half the things I'm saying. So like, even if I say I get off on it, they don't want to hear it.
How are you doing this secret objectification? Tell me about the secret objectification you're doing to them.
Well, it's just like the vetting process, like looking at what they want and like kind of like trying to understand what type of person they might be and what they might do. And then like, there's this, I guess, with being a masochist, like part of it is like setting up a situation in which I can be done onto. Like, have you seen the film called The Duke of Burgundy? It's about two women who are in a sadomasochistic relationship, and it's a beautiful film, but basically it just shows you how hard work submissives are, because they know exactly how they want their submission to be, and if you get it wrong even for a second, you've ruined the whole fantasy. So like I spend a lot of time vetting who I think is going to be like the person to do it, but it's a very luxurious position to say that, and that's what makes it not work if I'm getting off on it. And it's like, you remind me of my school teacher, and you remind me of my friend's dad when I was 16, and and it's a very like I'm just kind of putting my faith in these people for a second that I could say the thing that would make them do the thing that I want them to do. And it's like self-objectification, like that, subjecting, I don't know, like they're the object, but also I'm the object in wanting to enjoy my own degradation, and it's very selfish and it's masturbatory. I do think that submissives are very selfish. There's one word that's really stuck with me out of fatal strategies, and it's bathos. And like, forgive me if I'm wrong for getting this definition right, but like, it's about, the sudden drop from something that is super high drama to something extremely banal, almost to the point of comedy and absurdity. But to me, that just like, that's the whole meaning of human existence, is that one minute you can be like on the verge of an orgasm, and the next you could be looking at a coffin, and then you're looking at the milk in the fridge and you've realized it runs out and you need to go to the shop again. And all of these things happen at like Marxism addresses one plane of existence, but you still get horny or you still feel turned on by a woman's body. Oh, and also like gender is so, like, I know we've come to a world that is getting past these gender roles in terms of, but like you look at Instagram or like TikTok, and there's so much use of bodies to sell things, and those bodies do tend to be female bodies, or there's this kind of beautification of stuff. And I don't think people are having a very honest conversation about that at the moment in terms of what it means.
It's what Baudrillard would call cold seduction. It's using the power, the allure per se of women's bodies as the tool for capitalism, as the carrot to dangle in front of us, especially as our culture becomes more and more visual. We become totally inured. We female bodies sort of translate into objects, commercials. I was talking about this even with the esteemed Doug Lain, who likes to have beautiful ladies' bodies in his videos, and God bless him and let him do that. But and he was trying to give me some very complicated argument about how in fact it's a comment on advertising. Yes, whatever. Yes, whatever. But there's nothing wrong with it per se, although it does sort of it does sort of suggest that therefore those films are being made for men and for men to be attracted to. And it's a strange thing that in fact I have found myself to become more, although I'm a straight woman, I've become a connoisseur of women's bodies because so often I see them and I, rate them, look at them, see this one is more attractive than that one because they're thrust in my face so often. And my gaze has become a male gaze in many ways because of it, I think.
This whole thing about pornography that women watch it and they relate to the protagonist, and that's why there's such a prevalence of women watching lesbian porn, whereas men tend to relate. It's a really old study, but they tend to relate to what they would like to do to the protagonist, and so they even, I think, I don't know whether that's all to do with exposure as much as how socially conditioned as women we identify as the protagonist in a scenario. We identify as the object.
I wonder if you've got any questions for me.
Is there a reason that you've been asking sex workers to come on your show? Do you feel that they're giving an insight to dating and the dating landscape more than other women?
I haven't gone out specifically and said, as far as women that I'm going to interview, it's going to be sex workers. That's not been my desire at all. But I also do think that I want to talk about very intimate topics. And I think that sex workers are happy to talk and are comfortable to talk about these intimate topics and also have thought through a great deal about the politics of it, how it fits into our world, what their position in our world is, and are eloquent and have thought through these things.
I feel, or I maybe wrongly premeditated when you wanted to talk about the power of an object, that it was to do with the kind of subtleties of tease. And I have no skills in the area of tease whatsoever. I am what it says on the tin, which is possibly what got me into sex work. But as someone who potentially is able to employ tease in a more cunning way, do you think that there's an untapped power in the art of tease, and is that something you want to propagate to other people, or do you think it's unique to the individual?
I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea what you're implying. What on earth are you trying to say about me, young lady? I don't know where you got that idea about me.